We're here at Iowa City's iconic Prairie Lights bookstore to visit with James Lecesne, a New Yorker who is an actor, an author, a screenwriter, an educator, an activist, a man of multiple talents. He has won the Academy Award for Best Live Action Short for the film Trevor. That film was the inspiration for James to co-found the Trevor Project, which is the only nationwide 24-hour suicide prevention and crisis intervention lifeline for LGBTQ plus youth, and it's celebrating its 20th year anniversary. He is here in Iowa City, along with Ryan Amador, to conduct workshops for LGBTQ plus youth and their allies, which are titled Future Perfect Project. James, please tell us more about the Future Perfect Project workshops that you'll be doing here in Iowa City and around the country.
So, I was traveling around the United States with a show that I had written called The Absolute Brightness of Leonard Pelkey. It's a solo show that I did in New York, and then I was traveling around the country. And as I was traveling around, I was going into high schools and talking to young LGBTQ kids, but really using it as an opportunity to have them talk to me and tell me what was happening in their lives and what was on their minds. And I just was really inspired by what's been happening to this particular generation, like 12 to 18. I've been working with young people for over 20 years, and I just feel like there's something really amazing happening with this particular generation. They're just, they seem much more connected, they seem much more informed, they have a deep sense of social justice generally. They have a kind of insistence on inclusion and diversity that I've never seen before. And I got really interested in it, and I was talking to my friend Ryan about it, and I said, I think we should go in to the schools all over the United States and just see if it's not just like a thing that's happening in these major cities where I've been traveling and doing my show, but is it something that's happening everywhere? And so we went to Arkansas and Indiana and Seattle and New Mexico and here in Iowa and Denver, and we've just been going everywhere we can think, or anywhere we can go, and it's sort of based on this idea that these kids are in fact living in the future already, and that future hasn't quite arrived yet, right? And so for me, it's really an opportunity to actually visit that future, that they're going to make, and kind of get a glimpse of it. In the same way that when I was 15, gay and growing up in New Jersey, at a time when it was a sin, a mental disease, and a crime, incredibly, I knew that wasn't right. I knew that they were talking about me, they were talking about my love. And it took 50 years for that to change. So I have to think that these young people, they're also living in a world that they're looking around going, this doesn't jive with what's going on inside of me. So Ryan and I are really just doing these workshops through storytelling and songwriting to get them to actually tell us about their vision of the future.
You remind me in a bit of another line from a movie about Iowa, if you build it, they will come. Mm. So they're building what they see as the future, and the rest of us will be coming.
Well, the other thing is that I find fascinating about these young people is that they're at this beautiful period where they have so much vision, but no agency. Mm-hmm. Right? Yes. They really don't have the agency to be able to build it yet. So it's really like they're building it in their minds and in their hearts. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like what story and song does is it sort of, cuts a path into their hearts and minds in a way where we can see it,
Yes. Well, what surprises you? Are there other things? You've told us some about this generation of LGBTQ plus kids, but Anything else that surprises you?
Yeah, everything's surprising. Well, young people are so surprising, and that's their job, right? Because they're, I feel like they're already living in the future. It's so surprising because the future is, to us, unknown, right? To them, I feel like it's a little known. So there's that. I'm also really, and this isn't, I don't think, special to this particular generation, but I'm always shocked at how hard it is to be a young person. How much resistance there is to their becoming, and how much objection there is to their hopefulness. Like, oh, they don't know. And, I was just saying the other day to Ryan, we were in Orange County, California, and we were working with kids for about a week, and I was so struck by how decent they are. They're just, they know what's not right with human beings. Like, they know better than older people, and they're not. They're sort of shocked by people's bad behavior, and I'm really struck by their deep moral center, and I think for me, who a lot of my interactions with young people over many years has been through the Trevor Project, right? And for a while I was a counselor on the Lifeline, and those stories that you get from kids, those are kids in real crisis, right? They're considering suicide, or they're just in without any support at all. And I think one of the things that's been so encouraging about traveling around is to see what a difference it makes when kids have some support of the school, of their parents, of one another, which is kind of new.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference.
Are the challenges for these young people different from your own experiences? Obviously, you've touched on some, but how else are they different, the challenges today?
Well, I think one of the challenges, one of the things that's different is that when I was their age, I didn't know any gay people. I didn't even know that gay existed. I thought I was the only gay person in the entire world.
Wow.
I really thought
that's a lonely feeling.
No, I really thought I was, like, until I was about, I think, 15, I thought I was a freak of nature.
Wow.
And so I think that one of the things that's so different for them is very early on they're aware that there are differences, and then it's the questions become, what am I?
Yes.
Right? Like, so, that's a challenge in some way because they have so many choices, and also I think one of the challenges that's so different is there's so many things to be. When I was their age, it was, you were either gay or straight. You were either a boy or a girl. Now it's like with non-binary, with gender non-conforming kids, with the different types of gender expression and gender orientation, and gender identification. So you just look at those things, then there's sexual orientation, sexual expression, sexual identification, and you put all those things out, and you're like, oh my God, just that alone, And to me, it's exciting because they're so on the forefront of change and exploration and forcing us to question the way that we've set this up, right?
Yes.
And it forces us to slow ourselves down.
Yes.
Like, we have to slow down when we think about pronouns, personal pronouns. We have to say, like, wait, we have to ask, what's your personal pronoun, which we never had to do before. So I think their challenges are, on a personal level, are being able to self-identify. And I think also to be flexible enough to allow themselves to change, right?
Okay. Yes.
You know, to say like, I am, you know, pansexual, woman-aligned, you know, lesbian, you know, or whatever, then to say, well, maybe that's not who I'm always going to be.
I see. Yes.
Right? So they want to be taken seriously
Yes.
for who they identify as, but they also want the freedom to be able to change. And sometimes older people like things very neat.
That's true.
They don't like things to change. Let's put it that way.
Where do you think their encouragement comes from? You talk about they're getting support in the schools in many cases. There are clubs, there are support groups, there's hotlines like the Trevor Project, but where else is their encouragement coming from?
You know, I think that they're encouraging one another in a big way. I think the internet, and they are really the first generation to have grown up with in their hand, with the answers at their fingertips. And I think that this has changed them, you know. You can really see it a lot in the kids from Parkland, Florida, from the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. I mean, those kids are lit with a particular passion and purpose. But it's not unlike what we're seeing everywhere we go. There is a kind of clarity, and they're super informed, and I think that has to do with being able to get the answers. And also having access to the internet and allowing themselves to be encouraged by their peers. I don't think this has ever happened before. Although, as I'm always pointing out to them, you know, all the great social justice movements of the 20th century were started by young people.
Yes. Yes.
We were in Little Rock recently, and we went to the high school there, where the Little Rock Nine, you know, where they were the first 6 young people, you know, to go to an integrated high school in 1958. It was because they just celebrated an anniversary. And I was really shocked to look at those pictures of those young people and realize they were 14, 15, and 16 years old, those kids.
Yes.
And they stood up, you know, against...
We forget that.
Yeah, and it never dawned on me they were so young.
Yeah.
And I was just really moved by that, you know, and I thought, that's what happens, you know, the Vietnam War, the the gay civil rights movement. It's all, you know.
I think some of that is seeing the future, as you say, seeing the future that young people want and already living in it.
Yeah.
So.
And you know, some of them are fearless.
Yes.
In terms of actually standing up to that, and you can see it with those kids from Parkland, Florida.
Yes.
They're like, this has got to change. And you know, my hope is that just by sort of encouraging the young people and giving them a voice, that older people will actually step on board and kind of get on board and lift them up.
Listen.
Yeah, and give them some agency.
Well, one of the books you have written is Absolute Brightness, which, as you said, you transformed into a one-man play, The Absolute Brightness of Leonard Pelkey. That character, Leonard Pelkey, embodies a message of being fearlessly yourself and how that spirit had an impact on his community. Does that grow out of your own experience growing up? Was there someone that you knew that was the inspiration for Leonard?
You know, I think that, I mean, I think, you know, I didn't have the exact same experience as Leonard. You know, he's a 14-year-old kid who disappears from this town, and the book is really about like what happened to him, like you know, where'd he go. I didn't really disappear from my little New Jersey town, but a part of me did. I think a part of me disappeared at a certain age. Like I realized that it wasn't safe for me to be fully and totally my big, audacious, you know, enthusiastic self. So I learned how to turn the volume down. I learned how to turn the brightness down, and in order to live a little under the radar and survive in that environment. And I think that that's a terrible loss, not just for me, but I think for any young person, to feel that they have to be less themselves in order to be able to survive. I just think that that's not a world I want to live in, And I think with Absolute Brightness, the story is, it's really about how after that kid disappears from the town, that the townspeople understand what his enthusiasm and his flamboyance and spontaneity brought to that town and brought to them personally, right? So, I think if there's somebody that I knew, it was really myself. And every kid I knew and see who is working hard to kind of dim their own brightness. And it's been great traveling around the country with that show also. I think it's a period in which we are trying to figure out how to encourage people, not just young people, but encourage each other to be bold, be ourselves in the face of a lot of no.
Well, we are thrilled that James will be coming back to Iowa City to perform The Absolute Brightness of Leonard Pelkey, November 11th at the Engler Theater. And that event will be co-sponsored by Summer of the Arts and Iowa City Pride. So put that on your calendar. You have made a point of publicly honoring heroes from the LGBTQ plus community, like Edie Windsor. For those of you who might not remember her name, she was the lead plaintiff in the Supreme Court case United States versus Windsor, which was considered a landmark legal victory for the same-sex marriage movement in the United States. The case was won in 2013, only a few years before Edie's death. How important are heroes for young people, and who were yours when you were growing up?
That's such a good question. I think heroes are hugely important, and I think that they sort of tell a story in a human way. Like I just think about Edie's story, and she was like 83 when the Supreme Court decision happened, and I don't think she,
And her wife had already died.
Yeah.
Didn't get to see that.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that one of the things is that she had been fighting for gay rights her whole life. It's just that was the fight that became most public. And she's certainly been a huge hero for me and inspiration for me. Even though she's passed away, she continues to inspire me. And I also think that young people are more interested today in their history than they've ever been. And I think part of it has to do with the internet, and they just they're curious. They want to know who came before them, which is really unusual, and they're interested in who comes after them. Like a lot of these kids that, you can hear it again with the kids from Parkland, Florida, that they're not just doing it for themselves, they're doing it for the kids who are going to come into that school after them. And that's very moving to me, that they have this consciousness of a timeline, which most teenagers that I've experienced in the past don't really hold.
Yes.
Right? So that's kind of a new thing.
It's a maturity that's impressive. Yes.
And I don't think I had that when I was their age.
I certainly didn't.
And I have to say that when I looked out into the world, I think there were people that were heroes to me in the sense that they were being themselves, right? They were out there being themselves, but I just didn't have the consciousness to see any. Well, I didn't see any gay people out there who were. I just didn't see them. They were obviously out there, but I didn't have access to that information. So for me, I think there were people in the entertainment field, believe it or not, like Ruth Gordon, the actress Ruth Gordon. It's so crazy to even think of myself as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, and I was like. I was completely.
Were you in love with Ruth Gordon?
I was in love with her, and in love with her in the sense that she was so original. She was
Yes.
so herself, right? And it's such an odd and crazy and really queer hero to have as a you know as a young man. But there you have it. Like that was.
Well, there was that movie where she had that love affair with
Oh
that
yeah,
actor.
Harold and Maude. That's,
Right,
and I
so-
think that's that and Rosemary's Baby, and then I read her autobiography and realized she had been with the whole Algonquin Round Table, and you know she wrote Adam's Rib and you know that other Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy movie called like Mike and Pete or something like that. She'd written like with Garson Kanin, she had written like for movies. So I became really fascinated with her message, I suppose, which was her sort of like, just go out there and be yourself. And so I think she was an early hero, and there are probably other ones. But
that was yours. That's great.
But she's the one that comes to mind at the moment.
That's cool. Well, you've inhabited a lot of roles in your life, as I had mentioned: writer, actor, activist, educator. Which of these is most important to you now, at this stage?
Well, I think the thing that combines all of those things is the thing that's most important to me, which is that I'm a storyteller. And so whether or not it's telling a story through writing a book, or as an actor, or as a screenwriter, or however that story gets told, I think activism is also a form of storytelling in which there's a story out there in the world that, like, the ending is unacceptable. Like, for instance, the Trevor Project, before Trevor came around in the world, the idea was, okay, there are gay teens and unusually large amount of them kill themselves. And that to me, when I heard that statistic back in the early 90s, I was like, that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. And at that time, I was living through, the AIDS crisis in New York City, where all my friends and people I knew were dying. And I thought, okay, here's one generation that's dying off, and here's another generation that's killing themselves. This is crazy.
Yes.
So I think that the motivation to create Trevor, the character of Trevor and the story of Trevor, and then subsequently the Trevor Project, really came out of wanting to change that story in the world. And when I see these kids today that we're working with through the Future Perfect Project, I think this is the world that Trevor helped to create. It took 20 years, but it moves me so deeply that they know about the Trevor Project when we go into the schools, no matter whether it's in, Arkansas or Seattle. When we say the Trevor, they're all like, "Oh my God," that moves me. Or when a young person, which happened just last week, a young person came up to me and took me aside and just said, "Thank you. Last year I called the Trevor Lifeline and I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for them." And when that happens, you just understand that, that's a story also that just changed. And the story of that whole family and the story of that whole community just changed because 20-something years ago, I wrote a story about a kid who didn't feel like the other kids. So
you're changing the ending. You're creating a new ending that is a hopeful ending.
So if anything, I'd like to think of myself as a storyteller,
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, James.
Oh, this is
we
so much
are
fun.
so glad to have you here, and we look forward to you coming back in
That's
November.
great. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.